permit me to skip the formality of elaborately welcome the respected guests on the dais. I just welcome all of you together in one word as friends. I would like to start this discussion by recalling one of the sentences from the writings of Khalil Gibran, in which a priest asks the prophet, "Speak to us on religion." And he said, "Have I spoken this day of aught else? Is not religion all deeds and all reflection, and that which is neither deed or reflection, but a wonder and a surprise, even springing in the wonder and surprise of not doing anything?" Similarly, in the last Cochin Biennale, there was a poet from Chile. His name is Raul Zurita. He was asked, "Can poetry save the world?" He replied, "No. But without it, the world will end in 30 seconds. This particular term, poetic spirituality, which has been translated into Malayalam with the word Kavyatmakada. Some say that this particular coinage is a contribution of Professor Jojo Paul. So this is a coinage of his in which he is trying to analyze the spiritual aspects of Dr. Augustin's poetry. To me, this is not a surprise. Poetry has always been associated with religion. In fact, the word for poet among the Romans was vatis, which meant a poet, a bard, or a prophet. A vatis, or a bard, is a divinely inspired person. He is mad. He is possessed with special ability by which he is able to understand the future and the past and the present in a state of frenzy. So that's the meaning of the word vatis that is generally used by the Romans for a poet. So this idea of association of poetry with spirituality is not an old thing. It's not a new thing. It's a very, very old one. In fact, if you take all ancient literature, especially drama, it has originated centered around temples and in churches. Take, for example, the epic, Iliad, Odyssey, Aeneid, Ramayana, Mahabharata, the Divine Comedy, and the Paradise Lost. These are all called epics. But in India, I don't think ordinary people will understand Ramayana and Mahabharata as epics. For them, they are religious books. There is a practice among the Romans and among the Greeks. When they do something, when they want to do something special, they open either Iliad or Aeneid, and the passage which they get, they make use of it to decide the next course of action. This is called sortis virgilianae, which means taking a lot in the name of Virgil. So ancient people associated divine quality for their epics like Iliad and Aeneid. I do not know whether this practice is prevalent among the Hindus, opening Ramayana or Mahabharata to decide on the course of action. You will find this procedure being done among the Christians. Often they open the Bible and decide what they should do. Of course, generally condemned as a superstitious practice, but among the public, it is used that way. Works of art are closely related with religion. Unfortunately, recently, we don't want to bring in discussion of religion in public forums. But religion and poetry are closely linked. And the idea is the fact. That's the difference between history and poetry. Poetry is not composed of facts, it is composed of ideas. And facts are often created, manipulated in order to convey the idea. If you take the Old Testament, that's the first book of the Bible, especially the book of Genesis, you will find the story of creation, in which God comes as a magician and performs lots of magic, and each day he performs an act of creation. And finally, he creates man. And after the creation of man, God conducts a parade of animals before Adam. He shows them all the animals, the rhinoceros, the giraffe, the tiger, the lion, the kangaroo, everything. But unfortunately, Adam does not take any delight in any one of these animals. God understands that there is something lacking in his work. And finally, he puts Adam into a deep sleep and takes one of his ribs like a thief and clothes it with flesh and blood and presents before Adam. And this is Eve, this is woman. Adam is delighted at that story. But do you really believe that God really takes the rib of a person? The book of Genesis is highly poetic. If you take each of the creation stories as facts, we are thoroughly mistaken. They are brilliant works of poetry through which God, the writer of the books, is conveying the powerful the lesson that this is the flesh of my flesh and the bone of my bone, and a man shall not separate from a woman. So that's the story behind it. So when you look at poetry as a book of facts, you will not be able to understand poetry. Poetry should be understood as a book of ideas. Now let me come back to Dr. Augustin's poem and consider how these particular aspects of facts and poetry and religion gets mixed together in his poems. One of his titles, called Talamuragal, he says, Ivide nammade vishwasam surakshidam. I think in that statement I find the best expression of what is called poetic, prophetic irony. It's a big irony. Srinivasan, Jagannathan, who came to Kannadipura to practice their religion, to escape from the tyranny of the Christians under the Portuguese. What happens to him? Later, he becomes a Christian. It so happens that someone brought to his home a vessel of oil which is blessed by a priest, and he applied on his knee, and his pain on the knee got cured all on a sudden. The person who came from all the way to practice his religion in the serenity of Kannadipura, all on a sudden becomes a Christian. When we continue, there is another one, Chinti Poguna Topigal. In that there is a statement, Kazhinja Easterine, Thomasinte Muttathanu, Ettavum Valiya Meshappu Viriഞ്ഞത്. Often it happens in our religious understanding. In fact, we are not catching the crux of religion. We are catching on the peripheral aspects of religion. Similarly, when we move on, in one of his pieces called Yatragal, there's a little story of Pravum Kaluganum. In a stage, a child is praying because a vulture is going to pound upon the dove. And she is praying. The girl is praying. And the audience pray. The poet pray. We all pray so that the dove may be saved from the vulture. Suddenly, the poet gives the instruction, descend, come down. And the dove comes down. But unfortunately, dove falls in front of an archer, a warden, trying to shoot down the dove. Again, the audience pray. The girl also prays that God may come to the rescue of that child. Through a miracle, the archer is trying to point the arrow at the dove, but by a technical mistake, it falls on the head of the vulture, and the vulture dies. So that's what happens in this poem. So he is not making any reflection on the right and wrong of these actions. What does he do? He is creating an awareness of values. He creates a criticism of life in his poems. Poetry is meant to create a criticism of life, to create a heightened awareness of values. These values could be in conflict. What I believe may be in conflict with what another person believes. So it is here we see the kaleidoscopic nature of poetry. Different people understand it differently. Just one more observation before I conclude. We all know Dr. Augustine very personally. But when you read his poems, you don't see him anywhere in his poetry. I think it is one of the signs of great poetry that the author is absent. We call it the negative capability, the ability to negate himself and not to be as a kind of what we call a theatrical ventriloquist, coming forward and putting his ideas in the mouths of characters. No, you don't see Augustine anywhere. That's one of the beauties of his poetry. Unfortunately, one more observation. This man has been writing poems for the past 60 years. 60 years. I used to wonder, how can a poet go on writing without recognition? Augustine could do that. He has written over 1,600 pages of poetry. So this is something which always intrigued me. So maybe among his friends, among his close circles, among their limited number of critics, he has got some recognition. I hope and pray one day his works will be recognized, as it often happens in English poetry also. You will find the metaphysical poets who wrote in the 17th century were never recognized. Great poets like Gerard Manley Hopkins, the Jesuit priest poet, though he wrote in the 19th century, his books were published in the 20th century. These kind of things do happen in literature. What we call the mainstream poetry will be appreciated maybe at a later generation. I hope that Augustine's poetry should get the kind of recognition that it deserves, and I hope and pray that in the near future it will get the due recognition that is already overdue. Thank you.